Okay, so I've drawn my column grids, and now I want to put columns in following those grids, and you can see quite clearly that they are round columns, and so I'm going to use the AutoCAD file really for what I've put it in for, which is to get my measurements. So I'm going to use the measure tool here in Revit and simply measure that column. I'll save it in a moment, so I'm going to cancel that, and I'm just going to measure that diameter. That's the beautiful thing about getting AutoCAD files, you'll get perfect measurements usually. So there you can see it's 600, and so that's the diameter I need for my column. So again, columns should be really easy as long as you make sure you use the right one, and that is structural columns, not architectural columns. So you probably all have seen that the column tool gives you those two options every time, and I'd advise that you just avoid architectural columns unless you really need them. And normally the only time you need them is if you've got some interesting or unusual detailing, which you would normally have for more old-fashioned columns, or the classical orders. If you want to do a classical column, need architectural columns, but otherwise structural columns will work in most cases. So that's what you should use. So make sure you're aware of that. And again, here clicking on the option under columns, I'm going to go to structural columns, and then click load family. And again, I need to make sure I'm loading structural columns, not regular columns. So the columns folder is for architectural columns. We don't want those, we want structural columns, so you need to find the structural columns folder. Double click on that, and then you can go to concrete, and you'll find concrete round column. Double click there, and then I can simply click on the name in the properties panel and choose the 600mm column. It's already there. So a lot of the standard sizes will be there. It's easy to make your own, but it's nice when they're there. So then, before I go to make a column though, there's another really important option that a lot of people miss. On the options bar, you've got to set that to height. Otherwise it'll go down into the ground, not up. Height. So where it says depth, you can change that to height. Then next to that, you need to change that unconnected option to level 1. Then, this is where it gets a bit quicker. You can click the Add Grids button on the ribbon at the top, and then just make a window around everything. So notice how it's just put a column on every grid in a section. Click Finish, and then, yep, Add Grids, and then make a window around everything. It'll only select grid lines, and then just click the tick up the top right to finish, and it'll make them. So now to check that, I'm going to go to a 3D view, clicking on the little house to make a default 3D view at the top, and I can see the columns. It's that easy. So once we've got a floor, we'll have a good basis for working in 3D as well. But before I do anything else, I'm going to just check my levels. Going into the south elevation, that's usually a good one to use for setup. So I've just double clicked on south in elevations, and I'm really there just looking at my two levels, ground floor and level 1. I'm going to select level 1 and maybe just extend that with the grip there out to the right so that it's at least outside of my columns. I'll have to keep adjusting that as you work on it, but it's good just to at least bring it out on both ends a little bit, so you've got some more room. Just to give you some more room. So these tags for the levels should be outside of anything you make. So you can just keep bringing those out as you make more things. So we can check there that the columns do go from ground floor to level 1. To check that they're attached, you can select level 1 and change that height to something else. So I'm just going to change that to 5,000. And you should see that your columns move. If they don't, you can fix it by just selecting a column, right-click, and then select all instances in entire project. And then just check that you've got the same properties as me. So you've got ground floor for the base level, should all have that, but then top level, if it's not connecting to level 1, just make sure that's level 1 for the top level, and then no numbers, or it should be 0 and 0 for base offset and top offset. And that's it. So I'll give you a minute just to make sure that's working, and then we can have a look at doing the floors and maybe the walls.